Our panelists are Smitha Raiodazo. She's the Director of U.S. Legal Programs at HIAS. She has also lived and worked in Bogota, Colombia, Delhi, France, and she holds a JD and an MA in International Politics from the American University and a BA from Emory University. She speaks fluent French and Spanish and is barred in both MD, which is Maryland, of course, and in DC. Also on that panel is William C. Silverman, a lot easier to say, and is a partner and responsible for leading the PROCAWA global pro bono efforts, providing assistance to individual clients and nonprofit organizations in litigation, as well as transactional matters, focusing on identifying and securing pro bono opportunities and partnerships, and ensuring widespread participation in these projects. Bill has spearheaded a partnership among several law firms with a whole long litany of credentials. And throughout his career, he's dedicated himself to the promotion of equal access to justice through pro bono service, particularly in the area of family court, anti-trafficking, and immigration. Our panel.
Hi, I'm Smitha Raiodazo. I want to thank the UNA for inviting me to speak today. I'll be quick because I think we only have 5 minutes for the both of us, or should we plan on going over? I don't know what you would like me to do.
No, you have 4 minutes of your own.
4 minutes, great. So I'm here as the director of U.S. Legal Services at HIAS. HIAS was originally founded in 1881 as a refugee resettlement agency founded to help the Jews fleeing the pogroms in Russia and Eastern Europe. Since the 2000s, HIAS has served as a refugee resettlement agency for all refugees of all countries, nationalities, religions. And in addition to our resettlement work, we have direct immigration legal services with offices here in New York City and in Silver Spring, Maryland. I'm here to talk about issues representing children in removal proceedings here in the United States. Removal proceedings is deportation proceedings. There are lots of issues that we can discuss, so it was pretty difficult to come up with just a few. And one of the things that's really worth impressing upon you is kind of the lack of judicial independence in the immigration courts. When most people think of federal judges, they think of Article 3 of the Constitution being a separate branch of government. That's not the case in immigration court. So immigration judges are employees of the Department of Justice under the executive branch. Lawyers in immigration court, such as myself, it's an adverse environment. Usually those of us that represent immigrants, children or adults, are basically against government attorneys, ICE attorneys, who are employees of the Department of Homeland Security, also under the executive branch of the U.S. government. So it starts out at an uneven playing field, which a lot of immigration judges, and certainly the Union of Immigration Judges, have been very vocally against for a long time now. Additionally, unlike other court representation, there's no right to free legal representation in immigration court, not for adults and not for children, which means that babies, toddlers, teenagers who are in deportation proceedings have no right to representation. Of course, they can obtain it at their own cost, but pro bono representation is certainly limited. I'm very fortunate to work for an organization that provides 100% pro bono representation to persons in removal proceedings. This is a bit of an older statistic, but I thought it was worth sharing. That this is from 2015, but I don't think the statistics have changed that much. Around 10% of kids who are represented in immigration court are actually sent back, deported to their home countries, whereas only 10% of those children who are unrepresented in court won relief from deportation. So that's how important representation can be in immigration court. There have been a lot of changes in this administration when it comes to kids in removal proceedings, or just immigrants really in general. Back in October of last year, then Attorney General Sessions started implementing quotas and deadlines on immigration judges, stating that each judge had to complete 700 cases per year and maintain a remand rate. So a remand is when a judge is sent back a case after an appeal, of fewer than 15% per year. That equates to probably issuing either a removal order or a grant of relief in nearly 3 cases per day. The average individual hearing, that's the main hearing for asylum, you should plan on potentially 2 to 3 hours for that hearing. And that also doesn't account for the time that a judge spends doing scheduling hearings, bond hearings, attending trainings, reviewing case files. So it's close to impossible to imagine how a judge could get that done without being motivated to deny motions for relief that otherwise should have been granted, because those kinds of quotas and deadlines are almost impossible to meet, and they take a lot of independence away from immigration judges. Back in May, immigration judges, there was a case that basically held that immigration judges no longer have the right to grant something called administrative closure. Administrative closure was kind of a docket management tool that judges could use to basically put a case on hold if there wasn't anything active going on, or say an immigrant had a case before USCIS, an affirmative case that, if granted, would allow them to stay here permanently, but maybe that case may take 6 or 7 years based on backlogs. A judge could have put that case in administrative closure and moved on with his or her docket, and now they no longer have the right to do that. So now somebody who, say, is potentially eligible for what's called a U visa, a visa for victims of particularly serious crimes, where the backlog is close to 7 years, now that person could easily just be deported and wait for a decision on their U visa back in their home countries, even if they could be subject to persecution there. So there's just been a lot of changes, a lot to keep up with. But in terms of children, one big thing happened very recently. So a UAC, or unaccompanied child, is defined as a child who has no immigration status in the U.S., is under 18 years old, has no parent or legal guardian in the U.S., who is available to provide care and physical custody. So basically, what happens is if a kid comes to the U.S. alone, that means without a parent or guardian, CBP, Customs and Border Protection, or ICE must notify Health and Human Services, specifically the Office of Refugee Resettlement, within 48 hours of that child's arrival, and transfer the child to ORR custody within 72 hours, okay? And that because in that time period, if that child does not have a parent or guardian who's able to provide protection or custody during that time period, they have been determined a UAC, unaccompanied child. And starting in 2013, the law basically was that designation remains with the child throughout the pendency of their proceedings, even if they're later reunited with a parent or they ultimately turn 18. And let's see, in 2013, the government decided that USCIS, specifically the asylum offices, would be the government agency responsible for determining asylum cases for kids. It's a non-adversarial environment with officers who are specifically trained to work with traumatized persons and have specific training to also work with children. And the government decided that was the best agency to handle kids' cases. But last year, there was a court case that held that when a child turns 18, they're no longer subject to the jurisdiction of the asylum office, but rather an immigration court. So the minute they turn 18, they have to enter that adversarial environment where they have basically a prosecutor working against them. They have to get on a stand and answer questions from a judge and work with an interpreter. And even worse, this year in May, there was a recent policy that there has to be an independent factual inquiry whether an individual actually meets the USAC definition at the time of an asylum application. So that means if the child has been reunited with a parent or has turned 18, they are most likely not going to be afforded the opportunity to present their cases for asylum at the asylum office, and now they will have to do it before a judge. And that went into effect June 30th. So we're doing that now and trying to figure out how it goes. I just want to mention, I saw my time's up, but I think there was a slight change in the schedule. I had previously coordinated with the person who was also supposed to present on children's rights, who was quite the expert on children in detention. I have to be very truthful that I'm not. So if you're in my small group, I will certainly try my best to be a resource to you. But my expertise is more what happens in the courtroom at the asylum office and less what happens in detention. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. There's a contest about who is the least expert in the room. I win that contest. So we have no common ethnicity in this country. We have no common religion. So what unites us? What unites us as a country? Ideas unite us as a country. Ideals. The ideals of liberty, equality, constitutionalism, right? These are ideas that all came out of our revolution. And out of that revolution came a sense among some that we would be a model for human rights. Now, obviously, the human rights in 1797 were a little different than they are now, but there was this sense, this optimism, right? This sense that we are a nation of immigrants, that we define ourselves as immigrants. And in fact, economists agree on nothing. They all agree that immigration is good for the economy. But as we know, there is a second strain in American history with regard to immigration, and that is a nativist, a fear that immigrants are dangerous, immigrants are criminals. We went through this with the Irish, the Chinese, the Japanese, even the Jews in 1939 when we sent back a boat of 900 Jewish refugees back to Nazi Germany because our immigration laws were too restrictive and there were anti-Semites in the State Department. There's a sense that what happened in the past is different than what's happening today. But I'm telling you, what's happening with Central American migration is no different than what's happened in the past. In the last year, 7 children have died in U.S. custody. We're putting children in cages We're separating children, we're submitting them to terrible conditions, and I don't care if we can't disagree, we can disagree over what immigration policy should be, but there should be no disagreement about treating people with a certain sense of human dignity. So good afternoon. My name is Bill Silverman, and I'm the radical corporate lawyer in the room. I'm the pro bono partner at Proskauer Rose. By background, I was a conventional lawyer until I woke up one day and decided I wanted to do this full time, and I'm glad that I did. So I could speak for hours on immigration, which I'm not going to do. I'm going to focus on one issue. I think this is the single big, aside from family separation, I think this is the biggest single issue with regard to immigration, and everyone should be aware of it. It's the Remain in Mexico policy, otherwise known as the Migrant Protection Protocol, which of course is a ridiculous name for it. Basically, what the government is doing now is saying if you have an asylum claim and you cross the border from Mexico, you're going to be sent, and let's say you're coming from Central America. You're going to be sent back to Mexico, and you're going to assert your U.S. asylum claim from Mexico. Unless you can show by a preponderance of the evidence that you will be unsafe in Mexico. But you know what? You're not going to have a right to counsel during that assessment, and you're going to have no appeal. So that assessment is going to be made, and then you're going to be sent back to Mexico. I was in Mexico 3 weeks ago with some questions that I wanted to answer. Where will people stay when they remain in Mexico? Are they going to be safe from crime? Are they going to be persecuted? Are their basic needs going to be met? Are they going to be able to work legally? Will they have access to counsel? How logistically are they going to assert their asylum claim from Mexico? Anyone here who's working on an asylum claim? We have teams of lawyers who work on asylum claims. How could you possibly do that from Mexico? And what arrangements will the Mexican government make? Well, I went to Mexico, I worked with asylum seekers, and I don't have the answers to any of those questions. I think as bad as the humanitarian crisis is now, it's growing, and it's going to get worse as the number of people on the border grow. The other takeaway from my trip to Mexico is that there's a tension in Mexico, because to Mexico, immigration is a human right, as it should be. But they're also under a lot of pressure from this administration to curtail migration. They're trying to keep people from going to the border. They're breaking up caravans. They're deporting more people. They're detaining more people. And what is happening as a result? People are still migrating. It's just that the trip is more dangerous and it's more difficult. So people are now traveling more and more on the top of trains as opposed to in caravans, which is incredibly dangerous. And the other major takeaway is, of course, that we need to address the conditions in Central America, in El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala. And until we address the conditions in those countries, I don't care, there's no policy that's cruel enough to stem the flow of migration. So in short, we need to study history, and we need to start standing up for the very ideals that define us as a nation.
Oh, thank you.
The beauty of this is that while our last two panelists did not have as extended an opportunity to speak as our first panel did, you'll get an opportunity in the small group. So I would suggest that those of you who have questions and who really want to explore more might select to be in those groups. We will now start our breakups into our smaller groups, and I will give name to each of them. Group 1, which will be the New York State criminal justice reform issues. Facilitator will be Marielle Ali. Would you kind of raise your hand so that people know who?
Could I give a little introduction to that?
Of course. Come on up.
Thank you very much. So we have, you see on your program that there are, in fact, 7 group possibilities. And on your tables, there's information about the role and responsibilities of the groups and how to identify areas of concern, so that the groups can make recommendations that would be relevant to the U.S. Government and to the United Nations. And we have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 well-filled tables. Yeah, and nobody has yet been selected or volunteered for any of the groups. I should also say that 2 of the groups will be able to meet in the next room over, which is called the Berta Caceres room, and the other groups will remain in this room so you can spread out a bit more. Now, I have here extra copies of the registration list, because we're going to want to know who actually ends up sitting in what groups. But for the moment, we should form groups. We should identify who wants to be in what group. And it would be best if they were sort of even numbers in each group, not everybody join one and nobody join another. For one thing, you'll have more opportunity to speak and get your ideas represented if you have a good distribution in the groups. How shall we proceed? Perhaps by a show of hands?
Can we just
And
appoint
we
the
should
tables?
identify that because we've got 7 groups coming up here. We
Yeah,
could
can we just
have
take the
people,
tables?
as the group is formed, go to the various corners of the room and stand there so we see how these things shape up. Let's start with number 1, the New York State criminal justice reform issues, for which Maria Ali is listed as the facilitator. And may I have a show of hands? Why don't we start off with shows of hands in relation to the 7 groups, and then we'll ask you to move to the corners of the room.
Okay.
That way, without moving, we'll have a sense of how these things shape up. So, number 1, the New York State criminal justice reform issues. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's a good size. Number 2, policing and pre-trial issues. 1, 2. You're going to want to join that group, I can tell you, because I know this guy.
And I know her.
So we need a few more volunteers to join that group. I'll let that rest for the moment.
Okay.
Group number 3 is mass incarceration. How many people want to join that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Group number 4.
I keep adding one because you have to do the facilitator too, so I'm adding one. Each time you give me a number, I'm adding one.
Okay, unless the facilitator, oh, do the facilitators know who they are? I think Ginger has been in touch with everybody about facilitators and moderators and rapporteurs and all that. I'll identify those functions a little bit more in a moment. Group number 4, women's and family issues. Oh, there we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We've got a lot of people in that one.
A lot of issues.
Yes. Although, women's and family issues and policing and pretrial issues are very much related. So this is a heavy one. Group number 5, parole, post-prison, elderly and ill. 1, 2,
Oh, wow.
2 only, and that's going to be a good one too. Number 6, treatment of children. We can, if we decide that there's only a couple in one, we can condense, yeah. Treatment of children in custody, including legal representation.
See,
What?
women and family issues,
Mhm.
again, some of these overlap just a tiny bit.
Yeah, cause you can do 4 and 6 together.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Mhm.
2 and 5.
Women and family, children. Children in custody, including legal representation. 1, 2, 3. Mhm. Okay, number 7, recent asylum policies. Now, mind you, that treatment of children is identified as being an immigration topic,
Okay.
as separate from race and criminal justice. So that treatment of children in custody, that's custody at the US southern border, for example.
But 6 and
Not-
7 together, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and the last one, group number 7 is recent asylum policies.
Can you put 6 and 7 together?
2.
Yes, put 6 and 7 together.
All right, so I think that maybe the first thing we should do is to put the 2 immigration
Yeah.
items, 6 and 7,
Yes.
into one group,
Yeah.
okay? And then number 4 was a very large group, women's and family issues. And I would like to merge that with,
I object.
with another, with one that was for the head of few. Which one?
I think 2 and 5 are
Yes.
a more appropriate
Yes.
pairing.
Yeah. I
Uh,
agree. 2 and 5.
2
yeah.
and 5, 2 and 5 together?
Yeah.
Policing and parole?
Beginning to the end.
Yes.
Okay, so 2 and 5 together.
It is.
4, we'll leave as,
By itself.
and then we've got 1 and 3, which if I recall were
Oh, those were lots,
sort of, yeah,
those were lots. So that works.
all right,
So we end up with 5 groups as opposed to 7.
yeah.
1 and 3, 2 and 5.
So 6 and 7 is together, and 2 and 5 is together, okay? And you see on your sheet what those numbers represent, okay? So,
So you said 1 and 3 are together also?
No.
Okay.
no, they each have their own.
Yes, okay. Sure.
So, we have 2 rooms that we can work in. Berta Caceres, I think is the name of it. Berta Caceres is next door.
6 and 7 are
we-
there. 6 and 7 are there.
6
Yeah,
and 7 is
6 and 7 can go there as one
Automatically
group.
already.
What is a big
Hmm?
group?
They're already assigned there.
Yes, they're already assigned to that
We're
group.
heading that way.
And if it gets too noisy in this room, we could add one more to that space, okay? So, now we have, the facilitator is, in the group, is supposed to make sure that the group, has an even balanced discussion. The rapporteur is supposed to take notes and report back to plenary at the end of our session.
We have an issue.
And then resource persons are speakers who are able to contribute to the discussion because of their knowledge and make sure that the focus of the group is where it ought to be.
Okay, we got
Okay?
an issue.
So where are we moving? Yeah, where are we moving? Are we moving? On the table?
Well, George Gall
I just told
And Aaron Edgeworth here.
No, they're not.
All right, well, then the group can choose a facilitator if there's not one already named. So so Marielle Ali is not here? Is Marielle Ali here?
It worked out.
Okay, and,
Wait,
uh,
let's state,
Robert Windorf is the rapporteur for.
Can I change?
Hmm?
Yeah.
Could I be the rapporteur for 6 and 7? I'd rather do that. I don't know why I
Okay.
was chosen for something.
Okay, and now, George Garland is, as I think has already left the room to go to 6 and 7.
Right.
Could, I get it? Yeah. Talk with George and see which of you.
Yeah.
takes it.
That's why this is.
Mariana Gibo.
So we have a group going. Yeah, George.
And,
Okay.
yes, Robert was sitting in that chair. I'll be right back. Over here, we sort of agree to. Okay. So we can.
This is a bit confusing.
Shoot up.